Long ago, a gift was brought to the people of Ember Vale, the Elixir, a miracle hidden beneath the earth, a cure, a blessing, a weapon, a promise. And like a promise humanity has ever struggled to resist, it came with power. The story of Enshrouded has often been described as a fantasy about a magical plague and a kingdom consumed by darkness. But after digging through the journals, letters, and records scattered throughout Ember Vale, you will discover a much deeper story. Because the Shroud isn't really the beginning of the disaster, it's the end of it. The real story of Enshrouded is about hubris. It's what happens to people when they discover something great and convince themselves they're somehow exempt from the consequences. And that's what makes the world so disturbingly real to me. Not because of the graphics, but because the mistakes in Enshrouded feel painfully human. Before the Shroud, before the wars, before the ruins, Ember Vale was thriving. The kingdom flourished under Queen Pikemead. Cities prospered, trade flowed, life continued much as it always had. Then came the discovery. Deep beneath the earth lays a delicate fungi, and from this fungi, a substance can be distilled. The Elixir, described as a substance that could enhance strength and giving you a taste of eternity. To many, it seemed like the answer to every problem humanity had ever faced. The mysterious wanderer who introduced the Elixir didn't arrive with an army, he arrived with an opportunity, and humanity embraced it. Wells were dug, industries formed, entire communities reorganized themselves around extracting this miraculous resource. The kingdom wasn't conquered, it volunteered. You know, thousands of years before Enshrouded's story was written, the Greeks told a tale about a boy named Icarus. Given wings of wax and feathers, he was warned not to fly too close to the sun. Not because the sun was evil, it was made out of wax, it would melt off, right? It's a parallel to power without restraint, becoming self-destruction. Icarus ignored the warning. He flew higher, and the max, well, melted, and he fell. The tragedy wasn't that he flew. The tragedy was believing that the rules no longer applied to him. And that's exactly what happens in Enshrouded. The Elixir wasn't inherently evil. It was power. It was a tool, a discovery. But once Ember Vale, much like Icarus, tasted to what it could do, restraint just disappeared. The kingdom kept climbing higher and higher, convinced it could control the consequences. And just like Icarus, it wasn't destroyed by the thing that gave it power. It was destroyed by its inability to stop. And the warnings were there. And that's one of the most fascinating parts of Enshrouded's lore. You know, nobody was unaware of the danger. Workers digging the Elixir's well began reporting some strange symptoms. Burning eyes, damaged lungs, and persistent headaches. Thin mists emerged from the depth of the earth, the earliest traces of what would become the Shroud. And from that, the land itself began to change. Water sources became contaminated, soil weakened, floods struck some regions, droughts devastated others, wildlife behavior had changed, entire ecosystems started breaking down. Yet, the wells kept expanding. Nobody stopped, because the rewards were still greater than the visible cost. And that might be the most realistic part of Enshrouded. The kingdom doesn't collapse because nobody saw the danger. The kingdom collapses because everybody saw it and continued anyway. There's a reason people still think about Rome. Nobody wakes up in the morning and decides to destroying the world. Catastrophe is rarely dramatic. It's gradual, 1,000 small decisions. One more well, one more shipment, one more expansion, one more barrel, one more year. Every individual decision seems reasonable. Every individual decision benefits someone on the short term. And because the consequences arrive slowly, people convince themselves that there's still time. Workers suffering from exposure turned to the Elixir for relief. And relief became dependence. Dependence became addiction. And well, addiction became identity. Entire towns became consumed. People abandoned their responsibilities, their families, their communities, their future. They thought they were in control. Until they weren't. And I think no character represents this better than Lord Vorgoth. I know, such a cool name. The opening cinematic tells us almost everything we need to know. A mysterious figure offers him the elixir, he drinks it, power surges through him, and from that moment onward, the fate of Ember Vale changed forever. And Vorgoth is but a human. He was the eldest child of Queen Pikemead, the Glorious. After her death, he was passed over by his siblings who ruled the kingdoms. So maybe that eagerness for power surges from seeking for recognition, purpose. And the elixir offered him all of that. But power has a way of changing the goals that originally justified it. Soon the wells expanded, workers suffered, the environment disoriented, the shroud spread, and eventually even Vorgoth's motivations become difficult to separate from the corruption consuming him. Was he protecting the walls? Was he seeking power, serving his people, or had he already become a puppet of something larger than him? By the end, the distinction hardly matters. Hubris doesn't simply destroy people, it transforms them, until they can no longer tell where their ambition ends and their prison begins. Most fantasy stories present corruption as an invading force, something foreign, something external. Enshrouded does something much more interesting. The Shroud wasn't invading Ember Vale, humanity unleashed it. The Elixir and the Shroud come from the same source. One is the reward, and the other is the cost. Humanity wanted one, but reality doesn't allow us to separate the two. You don't get the reward without inheriting the consequences. The kingdom ripped open the earth, the spores escaped, the environment changed, the world reacted. The Shroud feels less like a villain and more like a consequence. A bill that finally came due. As conditions worsened, society began to fracture, scavenger groups emerged, bandits seized power, communities collapsed, trust disappeared. The king proved incapable of addressing the growing crisis. Instead of confronting the disaster unfolding in front of him, records describe a ruler consumed by vanity, wealth, and legacy. Meanwhile, ordinary people suffered. Farmers watched crops fail, refugees fled their home, families became separate, entire towns descended into chaos, and eventually, the Elixir Wars erupted, not simply a war between kingdoms, but a war over a future that was already slipping away. Everyone was trying to survive the consequences of choices nobody wanted to abandon. And I'm the first one to say that the most frightening thing about Enshrouded isn't the Fel, it isn't the dragon, it isn't the Shroud itself, it's the people and their ordinarity. The journals scattered through Ember Vale tell stories of workers, families, refugees, farmers, lovers, people trying to live normal lives while forces larger than them spiral out of control. Again and again, the notes reveal something heartbreaking. Most people still believed things would get better, that someone would solve it. Someone is ought to intervene. Someone would stop the collapse, but no one did. And that's why these stories linger, because the people writing them often don't know they're witnessing the end, but the player does. And what makes Enshrouded's story stay with you is the familiarity. The people of Ember Vale didn't wake up one morning and choose ruin. They chose prosperity, growth, convenience, security, and when the first signs of dangers appeared, they convinced themselves they could deal with it later. The wells continued expanding, the warnings continued mounting, the damage became harder to reverse. Sound familiar? Because whether intentional or not, it's difficult not to see echoes of our own world in the Shroud. The Shroud begins as something distant, a strange fog on the horizon, easy to ignore, easy to rationalize, easy to believe someone else will solve, until suddenly it isn't distant anymore. It's in our fields, it's in your rivers, it's in your cities, your homes. Much like global warming, the catastrophe in Enshrouded isn't because of a single villain. It's the accumulated result of countless decisions made over decades, each one seemingly reasonable, each one benefiting someone in the short term, each one pushing the problem a little further into the future, until there's no future left to push it into. And that's what makes the Shroud so terrifying. It's a reflection, a manifestation of humanity's oldest weakness, the belief that consequences can always wait until tomorrow. The people of Ember Vale flew too close to the sun, not because they were foolish, but because they believed they were different, that this time it would be different, that they could keep taking without paying the cost. The myth of Icarus has survived for thousands of years because every generation thinks it's about someone else, and Shrouded reminds us that it never was. It's about all of us. And maybe that's why wandering through the ruins of Ember Vale feels so haunting, because beneath the fantasy, beneath the magic, beneath the environment, and beneath the Shroud, it feels less like exploring a lost world and more like exploring a warning.